As you all probably heard by now, Blizzard is adding cross-faction grouping for the first time ever in nearly full 2 decades of World of Warcraft. The Horde and the Alliance will be able to play together. That's cool and all from the gameplay side, but how does this actually impact the lore? And let me tell you, quite a bit. Luckily, Blizzard talked about this in the most recent official interview on how it will affect the story, the factions uniting, and they also talked a bit about the core foundation of Warcraft as a series, and that is the orcs versus humans. So is this ultimately the end to all Horde and Alliance wars, and why is this the case? So, as you may have already heard, the latest news is that Blizzard just announced an update that is in the works that will allow the Horde and the Alliance to group together in raids, dungeons, PvP, and this should happen as part of 9.2.5, so after the new patch. And personally, my opinion on this, it is really about time that they finally added this. They have actually hinted at this cross-faction thing nearly a year back, and I've actually made a video talking about the factions uniting a few months ago, and as I said in that video, it is only the gameplay aspect that is blocking this from happening. In the lore, it is totally different. Really, think about it, we have worked together since Warcraft 3, since Mount Hyjal. Realistically, this has been on and off, but ultimately, Horde and the Alliance always united to fight against common threats, big threats that threatened Azeroth. Almost always there was some reason to bring back war and conflict, but we always ended up together like a year later as a new threat emerged. The most prominent collaboration was in Northrend when we faced off against the Lich King, and we had that famous Brandgate cinematic where Saurfang and Bolvar fought shoulder to shoulder, orc and human, only to be betrayed by the Forsaken that ultimately started yet another conflict. Then we were working together on everything ever since, all the way up to defeating Sargeras, only being split up by the conflict stirred up by Sylvanas and the Jailer that led to the battle for Azeroth. But once again, we have united to fight this Jailer in the Shadowlands, so as you can see, there is obviously a big pattern. Seeing with the way the story is, there is literally no reason for the factions to fight, or at least there isn't much. I am a bit wrong on this side. There has been a big speculation that the war never really ended because we only reached an armistice. We have Terrellian that might want to avenge Lordran and again trying to retake Gilneas and capitalize on the Forsaken's weakness, but with what they recently said in that interview, that may never actually be happening, although it's not completely excluded. I'll talk about that in just a bit. Let me just cover the most recent info on what Blizzard officially stated in regards to all this stuff. When they asked him, is this decision really smart? The faction conflict is the foundational pillar of Warcraft. That is how the series started. Warcraft, orcs versus humans. It is literally Warcraft. And they said that isn't really the case, and I personally definitely agree with this. In Warcraft 1 and Warcraft 2, that was definitely true, but since Warcraft 3, the factions united with Jaina and Troll in order to defeat bigger threats, at the time the Legion. So over the years, this definitely shifted, and instead of just mindless conflict, the ideals of Warcraft have been adventure, exploration, and that the factions actually have more in common than they do that actually separates them. Essentially, both are just regular people trying to find their place in the world, but are constantly being pitted against each other due to certain external circumstances. Personally, I gotta say this makes sense because even back in Warcraft 3, Jaina literally fought against her own father, Kul Tirans, that wanted to exterminate the orcs, so the faction union has been a priority for a really long time. Ultimately, from the lore side, this makes just total sense. However, this now brings us to the most important question. They asked him, how will this new cross-faction grouping actually affect the story? Will it be acknowledged in the lore or not? And they said something along the lines of, it most likely won't, but in regards to the story, the two factions already reached an armistice back in BFA. So, realistically, when you look at it, this might actually be the other way around. It isn't the case that the lore needs to catch up with the gameplay, but the gameplay is finally catching up with the lore. I pointed this out in the video a few months back. Seriously, there is no reason now the two factions are supposed to be at any conflict. We are working together to save Azeroth, save the leader of the Alliance, Anduin, and Sylvanas is no longer stirring up the pot, nor is she in the position of power, nor is she a dark banshee queen, so there are no longer big big forces at play that are trying to strike up a faction war. Keep in mind, this isn't just my own speculation, just my own opinions. This is something they officially said. Blizzard told us that it is highly unlikely that a new faction conflict expansion will ever happen akin to Battle for Azeroth, and that almost certainly confirms that the war between the two factions is finally over. Of course, that is not to say they will be going to extremes now, that the factions will be removed, and now the humans will be walking around in Orgrimmar, or vice versa. They still want to keep the faction identity, politics, races, but they want to focus more on cooperation, and that this piece that we worked on for so long will finally take fruit. So that should ultimately be the case, and the focus will now be on working together. Of course, that is not to say that everything will now be rainbows and sunshine from now on, and that all of us will be friends forever and ever. They were, in my opinion, purposefully a bit vague at this point, but they said they now want to focus on a wider range of perspectives on this faction divide, instead of going just straight out Alliance versus Horde, black and white, all out total war. They want to put a light to multiple perspectives, so it will be up to us to decide on how we will personally stand in relation to the opposing factions. They said something along the lines of seeing the perspectives of the survivors of the burning of Teldrassil, of Gen Greymane, the guy that lost his entire kingdom, his own son, of the Forsaken that lost their home, and so on and so forth. So there will most likely be some sparks in the future. It won't be all harmony, but more than likely a crazy war like the most recent one will never happen, where we burn capital cities and launch massive all-out invasions. So when you really examine what they talked about in this interview, these are obviously huge hints for what is to happen in the future, and this will no doubt change the overall direction World of Warcraft is going to. From the gameplay side, I think this is actually genius because, let's be real, World of Warcraft population is not nearly where it once was, and it has always been a problem when you want to play with friends, yet they're only playing one faction and they don't really wanna put in a ton of effort into their other faction character. So now, for the first time ever, you'll actually be able to play with them, and I think this will offer a ton of opportunities for community building and for getting a stronger, more tightly knit community, which is overall excellent for the general health of the game. However, from the lore side, these are some really big foreshadowings here. They obviously shot down the popular speculation that a huge war is awaiting us once we return from the Shadowlands, with Telerian retaking Lordaeron and just going crazy. However, they didn't completely dismiss this. They purposefully focused on Gen, saying he will have his own perspective. So this might be a hint that he could possibly be going rogue, trying to retake Elneas, and that there might be a conflict, but he probably won't have the support of the entire faction in this. So this could lead to future, more localized wars that won't just be total mayhem, where we might even be able to pick sides and not even faction sides, just sides overall. Additionally, this also strongly hints that there will no longer be a big divide between the Horde and the Alliance, and almost explicitly states that big threats are awaiting us, such as the Light and the Void, and who knows what else, where the two factions will have to unite and there won't be much room for any internal squabbling. When you really put this together with the other facts, it just makes total sense. There are big hints for big threats coming up, and apparently the Jailer, what he did to the Sepulchre, started an avalanche that no one might be able to stop, which means that the first one mechanism may be breaking, the universe may change forever, and the only way to brave through this chaos will be as the Alliance and the Horde united, fighting for Azeroth. Thank you for watching. Check out the Draconids the next playable race by clicking on the screen, and check out the Nodes Academy for videos on real world history. See you next time.